Welcome to the Louisiana Sports Download, where we bring you exclusive interviews with sports figures from around the Pelican State, as well as in-depth content surrounding current events at the high school, collegiate, and professional levels. Please welcome your host, Hunter Bauer.
Welcome back for another episode of the Louisiana Sports Download, everybody. I'm your host, Hunter Bauer, and today we're joined by Mr. Pat Neck. He is the athletic director at St. Louis High School in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Coach, how's it going today?
Everything's well, man. Everything's well. How about yourself?
Oh, doing well. Yeah, Pat is, we got a little connection. Pat played at McNeese. He was a punter, kicker, three-time first-team All-Southland Conference, two-time first-team All-Louisiana, and the 1991 All-American. So good to have you on here, and you're one of the greats of McNeese, and we're excited that you've agreed to come on and talk a little bit about the split with going on in the LHSAA.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for the nice welcome. I know it's probably a lot of those things were probably before you were born, so it's nice to be remembered sometimes.
Yes, sir. Well, Coach, let's kind of dive into it. The split. Tell us your opinion on it as we get into it, and what you want to, what would you like to see happen come a few weeks between the two sides at the convention in Baton Rouge?
Well, we've been sifting through the 140 some odd pages of the proposals that are out there right now up for vote at the convention, and there are several that have to do with getting back together in some form or fashion, and ultimately that's what we would like to see happen. And I believe that I speak for the majority of us, quote, select schools when I say that. I certainly understand the public school perspective on the reason for the split in the first place. But just to me, it seems like it was a very rash solution to a very complex issue. And there are so many different types of schools here in our state and school systems and rules for who can attend what school and who can't and things like that, just ultimately dividing it into two different types of schools is a bit too simplistic for me. Do we have some sort of an advantage because our kids can come from different places? I would say probably, I guess. However, our kids also have to pay a significant amount of money to come to our school. So we get a very low percentage of the kids that actually do live in our zone. So it would be very, very disadvantageous for us to only be able to have kids from our zone. And speaking for us, I can't speak for all the Catholic schools or the private schools in the state, but the vast majority of our students come from our Catholic feeder system, one of the schools in our diocese. Occasionally we'll have kids that'll come in from public school from 8th grade to 9th grade, but we lose a lot more of those, say from Our Lady Queen of Heaven, which is our biggest feeder school. A lot more of those go to Barb each year than we get from public schools. So, and I'm not picking at Barb. I mean, they're not doing anything incorrectly. That school is a mile from their campus, but those kids have gone to that school K through 8, and then all of a sudden they decide to go to public school when they get to high school, and it's just we feel like that whatever advantage that we supposedly have is more than negated by our competition here been a lot more economical to attend than what we are.
Coach, what do you a lot of people have attributed the split. Of course, I mean, this goes back to probably the late 90s is as far back as they've been talking about a split. But, do you attribute it to certain schools having so much success in certain sports, or do you just attribute it to the thought, okay, well, they're private schools, so they recruit? What, I guess, can you take us inside the mindset of some of the coaches or athletic directors in the state?
Well, I would say if every private school in the state was like us, I don't think you would have seen that big of an outrage. I mean, we're successful in pretty much every sport. We had a historical run in football this year in the select side. We went to the semifinals for the first time in over 40 years. But other schools that let's be frank, the Evangels and the John Curtises of the world, with all of their success, they sort of were the linchpins for this, the idea for this thing to get going. Like I said, we feel like we have a lot more in common with the Jenningses and the Ioways and the Westlakes that we've played, every year for the last 30 years here, than we do the John Curtises or the St. Thomas Moores or the Catholic of Baton Rouge and things, just because they are much bigger, and they also are able to pull from a larger pool of students. Here in Calcasieu Parish in Southwest Louisiana, our public schools are still much better than what they are in a lot of those other areas of the state. So that makes it that much more difficult for us to compete for students, not even speaking of athletes, to compete for students. And that's probably why we lose a lot of our kids, our quote kids, every year from our diocesan schools, going from 8th to 9th grade. You don't see a lot of that in Baton Rouge or New Orleans or Shreveport, where the public school systems are not what they are here, and they basically are competing with other private schools rather than competing with the public school system.
You touched on it a little bit earlier, but let's talk about the attendance zones. That was a big issue that Coach Salto Formaggio from Hahnville spoke about in one of our previous podcast episodes. He was saying, I'm not speaking for him, but in a way, it was saying that if a student doesn't live in the attendance zone, they shouldn't be eligible to play at that school, or talk a little bit about that. What could be done to, I guess, solve that issue? Are there any proposals on the table that looks at that problem and could solve it potentially?
Well, I'll speak to the first part first. I think if you really went through all of the 300 plus football playing schools in our state, I don't think you'd see more than a handful of schools that have strictly students from their attendance zone there. I've read it. I'm not sure the validity of it, but I've read that the majority of Acadiana starting defense didn't live in their zone. And, going back to Barb again, not picking at Barb, but it's just what I know because they're here. Barb has 500 or 600 out-of-zone students bust in every day, and I'm sure they get quite a lot of athletes from that. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a court-ordered thing. So I think if you really looked into the way that a lot of, and that's what I mentioned earlier about the different types of public school systems we have in our state, I don't believe, and somebody could prove me wrong maybe, but I don't believe that there are a whole lot of schools in our state that have strictly students that live in their zone. There are so many different ways that schools get their kids. You have parishes like Rapides or Lafayette parishes that have basically open enrollment. The kids choose when they're freshmen where they're going to go. Now in Rapides, it's strict open enrollment. When you're a freshman, you choose where you want to go, and you're allowed to go there. In Lafayette, they have, these academies, these different, there's a music and arts, and there's I'm not even sure what they all are, but there's different academy tracks that they choose. And, that's the basis for them choosing Acadiana or North Side or South Side or Karen Crow or all of the Lafayette Parish schools. Then you also have parishes like Sabine or Union that have only one football playing school. so they can get any kid in that parish that wants to play football, but they're not counting every kid in that parish for their attendance. Only if a kid from Florine wants to go play football at Manny, they don't have to count every kid at Florine, just the ones that come and play football. Same with Union Parish. I'm not even certain all the schools in that parish that they get to pick from. I know it used to be Formerville that turned into Union Parish. And then you have formerly, the Monroe City school system. My wife's brother coached there at Neville for 11 years. And they were the only school of the three in that school system that was not a failing school. So any kid in the city of Monroe, whether they lived in the Wasserman zone or the Carroll zone or the Neville zone, if they wanted to, they could go to Neville because those other two were failing. Cavante Turpin, that went to TCU, lived in the Wasserman zone and went to Neville because Wasserman was failing. His brother, a few years younger, stayed at Wasserman. Wasn't quite the player that Cavante was. If that was a private school that was happening with, you might see a few more raised eyebrows. As far as things that are on the table, I think one of the better ones that I read today was by Mr. Byler, the principal from North Vermilion. His proposal is to put it back together in 6 classes rather than the 9 that we have now, or the 5, and then split it up into 9. And he would apply a 1.25 multiplier to the select schools, which would potentially bump us up from 3A to 4A, but we'd be close. We'd be borderline. But I wouldn't vote on that based on what it does to us. And I think that's where a lot of our problem is. A lot of people vote strictly based on how it affects their school rather than what's for the good of the association. Putting everybody back together, making one more class where it would kind of condense the ranges between the top and the bottom of, say, 6A or 4A or whatever, and also kind of throwing a bone to the public schools that say that we have an advantage by being able to get multiple kids. I would say, like I said before, yes, we are able to get a kid from Sulphur or from Iowa that we don't get very many, especially with the construction in Sulphur. But we are able to get kids from those areas that come here. But first of all, those kids have gone to the Catholic schools there, their whole life. And second of all, we don't get close to half the kids that live in our zone. We have 2 other schools that are in our attendance zone, and the demographics of our school zone are not the demographics that are typically able to afford the tuition at our school. So we don't get a very high percentage of the kids that actually reside in our attendance.
Coach, what is the split since it's taken place? I think it was 2013 was the first year. How has it affected St. Louis as a school? Has it affected St. Louis as a school? What are there now disadvantages that a private school has that a public school can take advantage of? Talk about really the history. I mean, not really the history of the split, but how it's maybe affected the private schools this go around.
Well, it shrunk down our playoff pool. We have one less round of the playoffs, even if we don't get a bye. If you get a bye, you have 2 rounds off, which limits your ability to host a game and make some money. We hosted a game this year for the first time in 9 years, the first time since the split occurred. In 2015, we were the 5 seed and still didn't get to host a game. We had a bye and had to go on the road to the 4 seed in our first playoff game that year. So it monetarily, it shrinks down the number of playoff opportunities that you have. It also, with the small size of our bracket, we tend to match up with the same teams over and over and over again. And we've played U-High 3 times. We've played we've played Loyola the last 2 years. In basketball, we've run across U-High. In baseball, we run across Turlings and E.D. White and STM every year, it seems like, in the playoffs. And another thing that it's done for us and schools our size is because there are so few 3As and 4As, we have to combine 3A and 4A in the playoffs. 2 of our 3 football playoff opponents this year were 4A schools. We lost to St. Thomas More in the semifinals. They're 4A. Our girls basketball team lost in the championship game last year to Lee Magnet, a 4A team. In 2017, our baseball team went to the finals and lost to Turlings, a 4A team. So, we feel like we compete pretty well with other 3As, but in the playoffs, we're forced to compete with schools, with 300 and 400 more students than we have. And it's just kind of puts us at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody about that the other day, and it's crazy how even with the select playoffs, even the 5As and the 2As and the 1A still get their own bracket, even though they're not as many, but the 3A and the 4A have to kind of fight in between each other, which I always thought was not fair as well. What could be done if there is no agreement to bring the schools back together at the end of the month? In your opinion, what could be done or what will be done?
In addition to the multiple proposals that we have to reunite, there are others that if those fail, there's other proposals to where we could have a little bit more control over our own playoffs, maybe change the way we divide it up, maybe not have us playing with 4As anymore, maybe make the division break lines a little bit different than what they are right now to kind of make it a little bit more equitable. But a state of our size with only, I want to say there are probably, just off the top of my head, there are less than 100 football playing private schools. It makes it difficult to have, classes where there's either not a very few amount of teams or a very big spread between the biggest school and the smallest school. So now, barring that, there has been some talk with the LHSAA of reinstituting sort of the school relations committee model that's been done in the past. And I know that the LHSAA and the executive committee are very in favor of putting this organization back together in some form or fashion. So I think that we would get some assistance from them in working towards a solution. I don't know if it'll take, delving deeper into the way schools of both private and public, kind of acquire in the 8th and 9th grade. And if someone were able to do an accurate analysis of how many students from out of zone certain schools have, and maybe that would open some people's eyes. But at this point, I think that you're seeing in this area, especially because, with us in Hamilton, we're the only, select schools, between here and Crowley. So we're very, underrepresented in this area. There's a lot of support for the split here because even though they see us as not being, over and above what they are talent-wise, they still look, the Kinders and the Welshes of the world, they still say, well, we had enough of playing John Curtis in the playoffs or playing those type of schools. So it's going to be very hard to sway some of those schools to think our way. But, I think if an accurate picture was put out there to appeal to both sides, I think that there's hope that we can reunite. I hope it gets done this year, but if not, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to hope that we can work, in the future towards something that can satisfy everyone.
Is there such thing? We talked about it on previous episodes. I call it accidental recruiting, and in no way am I accusing any schools of doing any sort of recruiting in the past. But could a Evangel or a John Curtis or a good team in softball or a good team in basketball, if they did, quote unquote, recruit back in the day, but they got so good that their performances did the recruiting themselves. Does that make sense? And is that something that could, that is applied today that, and it could be applied to public schools as well, because you have a lot of public schools that are very successful.
Well, I think you see that with, again, speaking locally, I think you see that with Barb, with baseball especially. They end up with, and again, not accusing them of anything. You brought it up. Their success, Coach Cicchini's program that he's built there, their success kind of speaks for itself. So people look for ways to have their kid come and play for Barb, whether that's, a kid from St. Mary's in Natchitoches, 6-8 years ago, moving down here for his senior year to play, or a kid from Puerto Rico moving here to live with a family friend and set the school record for home runs. That those kind of things kind of happen whenever you have a lot of success. And again, whether or not teams recruit, there are rules on the books for recruiting. Now, whether we need to amend those or change them and put more teeth in them, or better define the way we define recruiting, perhaps. But again, to consider it just a public or just a private school issue, I think is a little short-sighted, because you have people, Acadiana, their football program speaks for itself. West Monroe, their football program speaks for itself. Neville has transfers coming in from different places all the time, and you don't necessarily hear, the kind of accusations that you get, whenever you're dealing with Tyler Shelvin going from Northside to Notre Dame, or those kind of things. I think there is a solution out there. But it's going to take a group effort to kind of hash that out and see what works for everyone.
Going back to you mentioned something about the rules and the Constitution. Mr. Bonon, the LHSAA executive director, he stated back, I think it was in December before the state championships, that they had a constitutional attorney come in and look at the association's constitution, and was going to look through it and take out the unnecessary garbage and put it in layman's terms, I guess, where at the end of the day there's no doubt that this rule states this. Has that been the problem in the past, that one principal at this school interprets it this way and one school interprets it that way, and so now we're all in this mess? I mean, could that be something that would potentially help?
I think there's a lot of unnecessary legal jargon and things, and that, just like I said, looking through this 140 some odd page document that they sent, it can make your eyes spin, reading through some of the things and the corrections that have been made and the potential changes that we're going to be voting on and things. I think it's definitely, it definitely doesn't help when a football coach or a baseball coach or a soccer coach or whatever can't look up a rule and see what it is in 30 seconds, when he's got to kind of sift through 10 different sections. And at times, in one of the meetings that I was in last year, they pointed out multiple instances of two different sections of the rule book contradicting each other. So that's the kind of thing that this constitutional attorney was hired to kind of look at and kind of eliminate.
Let's talk a little bit about the LSA, the organization that was formed earlier this year. Coach, was St. Louis involved in that? And if y'all were, can you kind of give us some details about how that came to be and who headed that up?
Well, it was something that we were certainly involved. We certainly are involved. It's something that came out of. We select, again, I'll put it in air quotes because there's no real definition of select schools. There's Catholic schools, there's religious schools, there's Christian schools, there's magnet schools, there's lab schools. That we're all different types of schools that are all lumped in together as select schools. But there was a general consensus among all of us when we met at the last convention last January, that we felt like we were because we were outnumbered 2-1, that we were being underrepresented, with the LHSAA and with the executive committee and things. So we just wanted to not, some people interpreted it as us, wanting to break away. If we were New Orleans and had multiple opponents within, a stone's throw away to be able to play, separating completely from the LHSAA scares me to death, because we wouldn't have anybody to play, within driving distance. It's just that simple for us. We want no part of separating completely. We just wanted to have more of a unified voice where we were all on the same page and we had input from all of our schools to kind of have one unified voice when we spoke on matters with the LHSAA, just because, like I said, we're outnumbered 2-1, and our we can't have our way unless there is something that appeals to the non-select schools as well. So we just wanted to have kind of a common voice and a way that we could collaborate, among each other and come to some solutions and come to some things that would be beneficial for us if we're going to be relegated to kind of second-class citizens and playing semifinal basketball games at 11 in the morning on a school day, or playing a baseball game in Sulphur at 10 a.m. on a school day. Those kind of things, where we were kind of relegated to the second-rate start times at these events when we were combining and things. So it started with that, and then it kind of progressed to where we were going to host our own events, whether we did it on campus like St. Thomas More did, or whether we did it at a college stadium like they did at Tulane with Division I, or at UL with Division III, or at Southeastern with Division IV. It's just we wanted to have a common voice and more of a united front when it came to dealing with issues with the LHSAA, and the leader of the LSA, the CEO or the president or whatever, is J.P. Kelly, the AD at Catholic, and he's done a fine job of kind of get organizing and getting everybody on the same page and keeping us informed with what's going on, and looking at things that are coming up the pike that we might need to be aware of and things. So I'm pleased with the way that's going. I'm not as pleased with kind of the reaction that the LHSAA had to the formation of the LSA. They kind of took it as a we're want to be something that we're not, and so I think that communication has kind of been fixed a little bit. But again, there were no ulterior motives behind the forming other than us kind of wanting to get together and have a common voice.
Yeah, I wanted to read a quote from J.P. Kelly from the Advocate. He says, "I'm excited because of what we got done today," referring to the formation of the LSA. He said, "Our preference is for all the LHSAA schools to come back together, and we want to work with the LHSAA on that. This is about giving our kids the best experience, one they can remember the rest of their lives, and that is what it's all about today." And then, shortly after, the LHSAA released a statement, and this is what I wanted to ask you, because in this statement, Mr. Bonin said it was unfortunate that it's taken the select school membership this long to organize, and then he said, and it's unfortunate that the launch of the LSA happened. Coach, what was the LHSAA? What were they hoping for? Because it's almost like, we wanted these guys to get together and organize themselves. Then y'all go and organize yourselves, and then they say, well, I can't believe they organized themselves. Can you kind of, sift through that and maybe make sense of all of it?
It's tough to make sense of. I like Mr. Bonin. He and I have a pretty good relationship. And the few times we've talked, had a lot of opportunity last year to do so because we were blessed enough to make the finals in basketball and the semifinals in boys basketball and the finals in girls basketball. So we were runner-up in wrestling and runner-up in golf and a lot of things that led me to have, interactions with him. You're right. It did kind of send a conflicting message to us. But I think that's kind of been smoothed over. I think that they understand now that we did not form the LSA, whether they recognize us or not. We did not form the LSA to be a thorn in the side of the LHSAA. We kind of did it. Our ultimate goal, as JP said, and I think I told Warren whenever he asked me kind of around the same time, our ultimate goal is to reunite the association. But in the meantime, with it not being united, we felt like we as select schools, again, I'll put the quotes on that, select schools, private schools, we needed to be united amongst ourselves if we were going to be able to do anything that's going to unite us with everybody else.
Right. Yeah, and that's what, I'd read that article earlier today, just kind of preparing for the show, and I read that and I was like, well, okay, they wanted y'all to form and kind of get organized, but then they're almost punishing y'all for forming. So I just wanted to kind of get a little explanation about all that. Going back to the state championships, the select schools, they voted to play their football state championships away from the Superdome, except for Division IV. Coach Fitzhugh up at OCS worked it out with the LHSAA to play in the Superdome. Was there any did he get any heat for that? What was there? Did the select schools want to play in the Superdome but just didn't feel welcomed? Kind of take us through that a little bit.
I think everyone, internally, my thinking this year was when we get to the semifinals. Obviously, we had a long road to hoe playing St. Thomas More in the semifinals. But my private thoughts at that time were that would be about right. I've been doing this for 18 years, and I've never been to the Dome, and this is the year we're going to win and go to the finals, and it's not in the Dome. I think ultimately, everybody's dream here as a high school player and coach in Louisiana, nobody says we're going to the finals. I guess maybe they'll say we're going to the ship or whatever the kids say nowadays, but nobody says we're going to the finals. Everybody says we're going to the Dome. And that, to me, that is the ultimate prize. And one thing that shows me that we in Louisiana finally were doing something right is that Texas actually copied us with that. We started playing our state championship games in the Dome in 1981. Texas, 8 years ago, finally put all their games together and started playing all their state championship games at Arlington, in AT&T Stadium. So they kind of copied us for a change, which is kind of refreshing. We voted with the rest of the private schools to break away just because, we felt like we weren't being treated equitably with the start times, and it diluted, it cost Notre Dame and Catholic High money to go play in the Dome when they played each other in the finals. I would love for our kids to have the experience of going play in the Dome, but it just the expense of the trips and the other options that were available to us by playing elsewhere was just a better option for us as a whole. And as far as Ouachita Christian, them wanting to play in the Dome came as no surprise. They were kind of the one voice in the wilderness when it first happened, that they were kind of the last holdover. They kind of said, okay, we'll agree to play somewhere else if we're not the home team, but we'd really like to play in the Dome if we're the home team. That's kind of the way they were thinking all along. So that didn't surprise us at all. But I did hear something last week that I think they paid something like $70,000 to play their game, that one game in the Dome, which, as much as we are, pinching pennies to try to upgrade our educational facilities here and our science labs and keep the lights on and keep the AC running and make sure our carpets aren't moldy and things like that. I'm not sure that I could sell, or our head football coach could sell, hey guys, let's raise $70,000 to go play this game in the Dome. It's if they had, I don't know if it was the Robertsons that gave them the $70,000 to go do it or whatever, or if they had one donor, that did it. But it's just, to me, it seems like, the cost was just outweighed the experience. Now, obviously, the experience is priceless. I would still, at one day before I get out of this business, I would love to be on that sideline in the Dome. But being on the administrative side of things now, weighing the cost with the experience, it just didn't make a whole lot of fiscal sense.
One last thing, Coach, before we let you go. So this is just a what if. I've asked this with the previous two guests that we've talked about the split. If the two sides cannot work it out and the private schools decide to form their own association, talk to me about the pros and the cons with voting for that.
Well, like I said, in our corner of the state, the pros would be kind of hard to find. I mean, maybe it would open it up to where maybe we could play some Texas schools or something, as a way to do that. It would maybe give us a little bit more control over some of the things that we can do athletically. The cons obviously would be the cost again involved in travel. When you talk about our school, we have, when you count boys and girls, all genders, all varieties of our sports, we have 23 sports here. As we speak right now, we have our girls soccer team is playing a game at Washington Marion. Our boys JV and freshman basketball are playing in the gym right now against Sam Houston. On the course of any winter or spring weekend, we have 4 and 5 different teams playing at different places and different schools in different parts of the state. When you take away every possible opponent that we have within an hour radius, it would be very, very financially difficult on us, and that would be a con in that regard. So that would be something to me that is very unappetizing, so to speak.
Coach, if you, in your perfect world, if you could submit
I will say this, can I say one more thing about the split?
Sure, go ahead.
If it was so unequitable that football and basketball and baseball and softball were so unequitable that we had to split, there are other sports that are far more dominated by private or public schools that could be, can you name the last time a public school won the volleyball state championship? Or other than Division I, the last time one won a golf state championship or a tennis state championship? It's like they picked and chose obviously they're the most popular. Soccer is another one other than Division I. Private and Catholic schools dominate those sports. Are they their athletes in those sports that they don't matter? Just the football and baseball and basketball players matter. That was my question there. Why didn't we split everything? So,
exactly. Coach, in a perfect world, in your perfect world, if you could submit a proposal for the LHSAA convention to bring both sides back together, what would that proposal consist of, and what would it take in your mind to get both sides back together?
Well, I would submit a proposal to go back to the way we had it before, where we fight tooth and nail with Jennings and Iowa and Westlake and South Bow and LCCP, and we think we have a pretty competitive little district in football and basketball and baseball and things. I know that won't fly, that just going straight back together, because if it takes some sort of multiplier for us, or not just us, a multiplier, based on the number of kids that you have that either are from out of zone, or, to me, more accurately, I don't consider a kid that lives in South Lake Charles that went to Queen of Heaven his whole life and coming to St. Louis, I don't consider that as having a kid that's out of zone. I consider those kids basically our kids, because they've been Catholic school kids their whole life. If there was some formula involved to figure that out, and maybe you factor in, you raise the enrollment number by a certain percentage for every percentage of kids that you have that are not from your own system. I think that maybe could work or fly with that. I would love to be back together. It's going to be difficult to persuade people on both sides who have strong opinions, but it's going to take a lot of people doing what's in the best interest of everybody, and not just looking at what benefits them in particular.
Well, Coach, we appreciate you taking some time out of your. I know you got a busy schedule, and we surely appreciate you coming on and talking a little bit about the split with us. We'll try to have to get you back on to talk a little McNeese football here in a couple months.
Yeah, we can do that, and hopefully we'll have a good news to report whenever after the convention here at the end of the month.
Yes, sir. I'm hoping that everything goes well and we can get both sides back together, because I'm from Haynesville, and we always love competing against the Ouachita Christians and the Calvary Baptists and schools like that. It always made for great games.
You hear about Curtis and Evangel, but you don't hear about Haynesville and Neville and Oak Grove and those schools. And I'm not accusing anybody of doing anything untoward. It's just, some schools are successful, So, but I appreciate you having me on, and we look forward to listening to your shows. And yeah, I'll be glad to come talk some McNeese football whenever you're ready.
Yes, sir, Coach. Well, we appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to follow at Louisiana Preps on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe for free to listen every week to the Louisiana Sports Download.